He was a phantom, a whisper in the boardrooms of titans. The man who built an empire from dust and ash, Damian Blackwood. His heart was said to be as cold as the glass and steel of his skyscrapers. He'd sworn off women, love, any connection that might betray the icy control he held over his world. But what happens when a desperate girl, with nothing but courage and the weight of a dying mother on her shoulders, breaches his fortress? She didn't want his fortune, only a fighting chance. But she was about to find out that a deal with a man like Damian Blackwood costs more than just money. The polished marble floor of Blackwood Enterprises reflected a distorted version of Leora Vane, a girl who didn't belong. Her worn-out sneakers, a stark contrast to the gleaming Italian leather shoes that strode past her, felt like anchors pulling her into a sea of inadequacy. Every head that turned, every dismissive glance from a woman in a Chanel suit or a man with a Rolex glinting on his wrist was a fresh wave of humiliation. She clutched the strap of her frayed backpack, the thin fabric a pathetic shield against the crushing weight of this place. Inside the bag was a crumpled, tear-stained hospital bill for $200,000. It wasn't just paper, it was a death sentence. Her mother, her vibrant, laughing mother, who smelled of lavender and honey, was fading. The doctors at Mount Sinai had used words like aggressive and experimental treatment, words that were synonyms for expensive. They gave her a timeline that was shrinking with every breath Leora took. Desperation had a taste, bitter, like cheap coffee and sleepless nights. It had driven her here, to the 40th floor of this monument to modern capitalism, to beg for an audience with a man who was more myth than human, Damian Blackwood. The whispers about him were legendary. A self-made billionaire before 30, a ruthless corporate raider who devoured competitors for breakfast. They said he hadn't been seen with a woman in 5 years, not since the tragic death of his fiancée, the beautiful socialite Isabella de la Cruz, in a car accident. Since then, his heart had reportedly turned to stone. He was a machine of ambition and intellect with no room for sentiment. "Excuse me." Leora's voice was a timid squeak, barely audible over the hum of quiet efficiency. The receptionist, a woman named Sharon with a blonde bob so perfect it looked like a helmet, didn't even look up from her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone dripping with bored disdain. "No, but it's an emergency. I need to see Mr. Blackwood." Sharon finally lifted her gaze, her eyes the color of a winter sky, scanning Leora from head to toe. It was a silent, brutal dismissal. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't see people without an appointment, especially not people like you." The unspoken words broke, unimportant, trash, hung in the air. Tears pricked at Leora's eyes, hot and shameful. She had expected this, but the reality of it was a physical blow. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "My mother is dying. I just need 5 minutes." "Everyone has a story," Sharon said, her lips thinning into a cruel line. Security. 2 hulking guards materialized, their presence instantly making the cavernous lobby feel small and suffocating. Panic seized Leora. This was her last chance. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, pale and frail against the starched white hospital pillow. The thought gave her a surge of adrenaline so potent it felt like liquid fire. As the guards moved to grab her arms, she did the one thing they didn't expect. She ran, dodging a ficus plant and narrowly avoiding a collision with a man carrying a stack of files. She sprinted towards the private elevator bank, the one with a single, gleaming silver button. She had read about it in a Forbes article. Damian Blackwood's personal transport, a direct line to his penthouse office, his throne room. Shouts erupted behind her. Sharon was on her feet, her composure finally shattered. The guards were closing in. With a desperate lunge, Leora slammed her hand against the button. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft, melodious chime, the silver doors slid open. She stumbled inside, her breath coming in ragged sobs, and frantically jabbed at the PH button. The doors slid shut just as the guard's hands slapped against the cold metal. The elevator ascended with unnerving speed and silence. Leora's reflection in the mirrored walls was a mess of tangled brown hair, wide, terrified eyes, and a cheap t-shirt clinging to her heaving chest. She looked like a cornered animal. The chime sounded again, and the doors opened into a space that was less an office and more a temple of minimalist power. The room was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city. The furniture was sparse and brutally modern. A black marble desk that looked like a sacrificial altar, 2 leather chairs, and nothing else. The air was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something else. Something like loneliness. And there he was. Damian Blackwood stood with his back to her, looking out at the city he owned. He was taller than she'd imagined, his frame lean but powerful beneath a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire college tuition. He didn't turn around. "Sharon is usually more effective at filtering out the riffraff," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that sent a shiver down Leora's spine. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience. "You have 60 seconds to explain why you're not in police custody before I make that a reality." Leora's throat was dry. All the speeches she had rehearsed, all the desperate pleas, evaporated into thin air. She was standing in front of the one man who could save her mother, and she couldn't speak. 50 seconds, he said, his voice dropping a degree colder. "My mother," she finally choked out, the words raw and broken. "She's sick. She needs an operation. It costs $200,000. I don't have it. I'll do anything." He turned then, slowly, and for the first time Leora saw his face. The photographs didn't do him justice. They captured the sharp, aristocratic lines of his jaw, the high cheekbones, the intense dark eyes. But they didn't capture the chilling emptiness in those eyes. They were like black ice, betraying no hint of emotion. He was unnervingly handsome, but it was a cold, cruel beauty, like a marble statue. He walked towards her, his movements fluid and predatory. He stopped just a few feet away, his height forcing her to crane her neck to look up at him. He was a mountain, and she was a speck of dust at its base. "Anything?" he repeated, one dark eyebrow arching in cynical amusement. He let his gaze drift over her, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made her feel like an insect under a microscope. He took in her cheap clothes, her flushed face, the raw desperation in her eyes. "And what could a girl like you possibly have to offer me?" The insult was clear, sharp, and meant to wound. And it did. But beneath the shame, a flicker of defiance ignited. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his. "I can work," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I'll sign any contract. I'll work for you for the rest of my life. I'll be your servant, your assistant, anything. Just please, save her." Damian stared at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Leora could hear her own heart pounding in her ears, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness of the room. He was going to say no. He was going to call security and have her thrown out. The hope that had propelled her this far was beginning to curdle into despair. He took another step closer, invading her personal space. He reached out and she flinched, but his hand went past her, plucking the crumpled bill from her nerveless fingers. He glanced at it, his face betraying nothing. "Mount Sinai," he murmured, his eyes flicking back to hers. "Dr. Alistair Finch, a good man, overpriced, but good." He knew the doctor. Of course he did. A man like Damian Blackwood probably had the entire medical community on speed dial. He let the bill drift from his fingers to the floor. It was a gesture of supreme indifference. The money that was a matter of life and death for her was less than trash to him. "I have no need for another servant," he said, his voice flat. "I have a staff of people who are far more qualified than you." He paused, his dark eyes boring into hers, and a strange, unsettling light flickered in their depths. "But I might have a different kind of proposition for you." Leora's blood ran cold. She knew what men like him thought of girls like her. She had been prepared for rejection, for anger. "What kind of proposition?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A slow, humorless smile touched Damian Blackwood's lips. It didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's smile, full of sharp edges and dark promises. "I need a fiancé," he said. The word hung in the sterile air between them, absurd and monstrous. Fiancé. It was so far removed from the realm of possibility that, for a moment, Leora thought she had misheard him, that the stress and lack of sleep had finally caused her to hallucinate. But the cold, calculating look in Damian Blackwood's eyes was terrifyingly real. What? She stammered, taking an involuntary step back. You heard me, he said, his voice smooth as silk and just as dangerous. I require a fiancé, a temporary arrangement, of course, a public-facing role with a very specific set of duties. Leora's mind reeled. This was insane. He was a billionaire who could have any woman in the world. Why would he need to hire one? And why her? A broke, terrified student in worn-out sneakers. It made no sense. Why? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. My reasons are my own, he stated, the finality in his tone shutting down any further inquiry. They are not part of our negotiation. He began to circle her, slow and deliberate, like a shark assessing its prey. The position requires a certain profile, someone unknown, someone pliable, someone with no connections to my world, who won't have aspirations beyond the terms of our agreement. His eyes raked over her again. Someone desperate. You, Miss Leora, fit the profile perfectly. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, piercing her pride. He was laying her bare, dissecting her desperation, and turning it into a commodity. The shame was so intense it was nauseating, but the image of her mother, her breaths growing shallower each day, kept her rooted to the spot. What would I have to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You would have to convince the world that you are a woman I could love, he said, and the corner of his mouth twitched, a fleeting shadow of a smirk. You will attend galas, charity dinners, and board meetings by my side. You will smile for the cameras. You will wear the clothes I buy for you, live in the apartment I provide for you, and speak only when I tell you to. In public, you will be the adoring, devoted fiancé. In private, he paused, stopping directly in front of her. We will be strangers. There will be no emotional attachment. There will be no physical relationship. You will be an actress, and this will be the role of a lifetime. The terms were cold, clinical, and utterly dehumanizing. He wasn't just asking to buy her time. He was asking to buy her life, her identity, to become a puppet whose strings he would pull. And if I agree, she breathed, the words tasting like ash. If you agree, Damian said, his $200,000 for your mother's treatment, the rest is for you, a signing bonus for your inconvenience. He named a figure that was so astronomical, so life-altering, it didn't even sound real. It was enough to not only save her mother, but to ensure she had the best aftercare, to lift them out of the crushing debt they had been drowning in for years. It was a golden key to a life she couldn't even imagine, and it came with a gilded cage. Leora's thoughts were a chaotic storm. Her pride, her self-respect, her very sense of self screamed at her to run, to slap the cold, arrogant smirk off his handsome face and get out. But her mother's life hung in the balance. What was her pride worth compared to that? What was a year of her life, playing a part, compared to the years her mother would gain? The contract will be for 1 year, Damian continued, as if sensing her internal battle. At the end of the year, we will stage a quiet, amicable separation. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement so airtight that if you so much as whisper my name to a therapist 10 years from now, you will lose everything. You will walk away a wealthy woman, free to disappear and live your life, and I will have what I need. And what is it you need so badly, Leora found herself asking, a spark of her old fire returning. Why go to such elaborate lengths? For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face. It was a flash of something dark and bitter, a shadow that momentarily eclipsed the icy control. I have a legacy to protect, he said, his voice tight. My board of directors is traditional. They believe a man in my position needs a stabilizing influence, a wife, a family. They see my single status as a liability, a sign of instability. He gestured dismissively at the city below. They need to be pacified. A fiancé will accomplish that. It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. Leora could feel it. There was a deeper, more personal reason hidden beneath the cold corporate logic, but she knew she wouldn't get it from him. She looked down at the floor, at the crumpled hospital bill lying there like a fallen leaf. It represented one path, a path of continued struggle, of watching her mother fade away, of a life defined by what if. Then she looked at Damian Blackwood, at his impassive, chiseled face. He represented another path, a deal with the devil, a sacrifice of her autonomy for her mother's survival. There was no choice. There never had been. "Okay," she said, her voice small but firm. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze directly. The black ice in his eyes seemed to swirl, to deepen. "I'll do it." A moment of absolute stillness passed between them. It felt as if the world had stopped spinning. Then Damian gave a curt, satisfied nod. He turned and walked back to his desk, his posture radiating a quiet triumph. "A wise decision, Miss Leora," he said, pressing a button on an intercom. "Arthur, come in, and bring the standard agreement." A side door, one Leora hadn't even noticed, opened, and an older man with silver hair and a kind, weary face entered. He was holding a thick, leather-bound folder. This was Arthur Pendleton, Damian's long-suffering lawyer and confidant, another figure she recognized from the business journals. Arthur's eyes met Leora's, and for a fleeting second she saw a glimmer of something that looked like pity. He placed the folder on the desk, opening it to reveal a contract that was at least 50 pages long, filled with dense, intimidating legal jargon. "Read it carefully," Damian instructed, his tone all business now, "though I assure you it is ironclad. It outlines your duties, your compensation, and the penalties for breach of contract, which I can assure you are severe." Leora stared at the document. It was the devil's bargain, spelled out in black and white. She picked up the heavy, expensive pen lying next to it. Her hand was shaking. She thought of her mother's smile, of the scent of the lavender she grew in their small window box. She thought of the fear in her mother's eyes when the doctor had delivered the news. She found the signature line, Leora Vane. It looked like the name of a stranger. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she signed away her life. As soon as the pen lifted from the paper, Damian gestured to Arthur. "Wire the funds." Arthur nodded grimly and left the room. Damian turned his attention back to Leora. The cold mask was firmly back in place. "Your new life begins now," he announced. "My head of security, a man named Gavin, will escort you from the building. He will take you to a private suite at the Carlisle Hotel. A wardrobe curated by my personal stylist will be delivered this evening. Tomorrow morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, a car will pick you up. We have an appointment at Cartier to select an engagement ring. After that, we will have lunch with my grandmother. You will not be late." It was a barrage of commands, each one stripping away another layer of her old life. The Carlisle, Cartier, a personal stylist. It was a world she had only ever seen in movies. My things, my apartment. She began thinking of her tiny cluttered room, her textbooks, the few faded photographs she owned. "Your apartment will be cleared out and your possessions placed in storage," Damian said dismissively. "You won't need any of it. From now on, you will look the part." A phone on his desk buzzed. He picked it up, turning away from her, his attention already shifting to the next item on his agenda. "Yes. No, push the Tokyo meeting to midnight. I don't care, tell him to get on a plane." He had already forgotten her. She was a transaction, a problem solved, a box checked. She was no longer Leora Vane, the struggling student. She was now a possession, an asset acquired to serve a purpose. A large, imposing man with a scar above his eyebrow entered the office. Gavin, the head of security. He looked at her with the same impersonal gaze as his boss. "Miss Leora," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This way." She followed him, walking on numb legs towards the elevator. As the door slid shut, she took one last look at Damian Blackwood. He was still on the phone, his back to her, a king surveying his kingdom from his glass tower. He hadn't even said goodbye. The suite at the Carlisle was bigger than her entire apartment. It wasn't just a room. It was a sprawling expanse of cream-colored carpets, antique furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. A bottle of champagne sat chilling in a silver bucket next to a bouquet of white roses, so perfect they didn't look real. It was a scene of breathtaking luxury, but to Leora, it felt like the most beautiful prison she had ever seen. Gavin, the silent, intimidating security head, had left her at the door with a single black credit card and a terse instruction. "Mr. Blackwood expects you to look presentable for dinner. A reservation has been made for you at Per Se at 8. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. She checked her phone. A notification from her banking app glowed on the screen. The number was so long it took her brain a moment to process it. $500,000. It was real. With trembling fingers, she navigated to the hospital's payment portal and transferred the full amount for her mother's surgery. A confirmation email arrived seconds later. Paid in full. A wave of relief so profound it made her knees weak washed over her. She sank onto the edge of a velvet settee, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. Her mother was safe. The crushing weight that had been suffocating her for months was finally gone. But as the initial euphoria faded, a new, colder feeling crept in. It was the stark, terrifying reality of what she had done. She had saved her mother by selling herself. The price of her mother's life was her own. A knock at the door startled her. It was a team of people. A stylist named Julian with a flamboyant scarf and a critical eye, a hairdresser, a makeup artist, and several assistants wheeling in racks upon racks of clothes. "Leora, darling," Julian trilled, air-kissing the space next to her cheek. "Damien has given me a blank canvas, and we must create a masterpiece. Out with, well, all of this." He gestured vaguely at her worn jeans and t-shirt. "And in with couture." For the next few hours, Leora was poked, prodded, and transformed. Her long, unruly brown hair was tamed into sleek, elegant waves. Her face, which she usually adorned with nothing more than lip balm, was expertly painted with subtle, expensive-looking makeup. And the clothes. She was zipped into dresses made of silk and lace, draped in cashmere, and forced to walk in heels so high they felt like stilts. The reflection that stared back at her from the full-length mirror was a stranger. A beautiful, polished, incredibly sad-looking stranger. This was the woman Damien Blackwood was buying, a doll to be dressed up and put on display. That night at Per Se, a restaurant where the tasting menu cost more than her monthly rent, she saw him again. He was waiting at a secluded table, looking out at the glittering lights of Columbus Circle. He stood when she approached, his eyes giving her a quick, approving once-over. "Good," he said, his voice a low murmur as he pulled out her chair. "You clean up well." The compliment, if it could be called that, felt like another calculated assessment. Dinner was a stilted, silent affair. Damien was on his phone for most of it, firing off curt emails and text messages. He didn't ask her a single question about herself. To him, she was just part of the scenery, a necessary accessory for the evening. The next morning, the performance began in earnest. A sleek black car, so quiet it felt like it was gliding on air, took them to the Cartier mansion on Fifth Avenue. The store was cleared for their arrival. They were ushered into a private salon where velvet trays laden with diamond rings were presented to them. "Pick one," Damien said, his tone bored, as if they were choosing a pastry from a bakery window. Leora's hand hovered over the glittering stones. They were all impossibly beautiful, each one representing a fortune that could feed a small country. She felt a wave of nausea. This was a symbol of love, of commitment, and for them it was just another prop in a carefully constructed lie. She pointed to the simplest one, a classic, elegant ring with a single perfect square-cut diamond. It was still ostentatious, but it was the least offensive of the lot. Damien didn't even look at it. "We'll take it," he told the fawning manager. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was cold and heavy, a constant physical reminder of her cage. Next was lunch with his grandmother, the formidable matriarch of the Blackwood dynasty, Eleanor Blackwood. They met at her sprawling Upper East Side apartment, a place that looked more like a museum than a home, filled with priceless art and antiques. Eleanor was a tiny woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She looked Leora up and down, her expression a mixture of surprise and deep suspicion. "So," Eleanor said, her voice raspy with age but sharp as a razor, "you're the girl who's finally managed to thaw my grandson's frozen heart." Leora's heart hammered against her ribs. She remembered Damien's instruction. "Convince the world that you are a woman I could love." She gave what she hoped was a shy, happy smile. "He has a wonderful heart, Mrs. Blackwood. You just have to know where to look." Damien, who was standing beside her, placed a hand on the small of her back. The touch was possessive, proprietary, and sent a jolt of something hot and unwelcome through her. "Leora is a special woman, grandmother," he said, his voice smoother and warmer than she had ever heard it. He was a phenomenal actor. The lunch was an interrogation disguised as a pleasant meal. Eleanor grilled Leora about her family, her education, her hopes, and her dreams. Leora, drawing on the fabricated backstory Damien's team had concocted for her, spun a tale of a quiet, respectable upbringing, a passion for art history, and a chance meeting with Damien at a charity auction. She hated herself with every lie that passed her lips. Through it all, Damien played the part of the devoted fiancé perfectly. He held her hand, laughed at her scripted jokes, and looked at her with a warmth that almost seemed real. It was a terrifyingly convincing performance. That evening, they were to attend their first public event together, the annual Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala. It was the pinnacle of the New York social scene, a place where their engagement would be officially announced to the world. As Leora was getting ready, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "The doctor says the treatment is working. I feel stronger already. I love you, my brave girl." The message should have made her happy. Instead, it was a fresh twist of the knife. Her mother thought she was brave, if she only knew the truth. Dressed in a breathtaking midnight blue gown that shimmered with 1,000 tiny crystals, Leora felt like a fraud. As she walked down the grand staircase of the hotel to meet Damien, she saw him waiting in the lobby. And for the first time, he wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at her. And in his eyes, for just a fraction of a second, the cold, calculating mask slipped. She saw something else, something raw and unguarded. It wasn't warmth, not exactly. It was something darker, more complex, a flicker of something. And then it was gone, replaced by the familiar icy control. "You look acceptable," he said, his voice flat. He held out his arm. "It's time. Remember your lines." As they stepped out into the night, into the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras, Leora took his arm, her fingers brushing against the fine wool of his suit. The contact was electric. She plastered a smile on her face, a perfect, empty smile for the cameras. She was Damien Blackwood's fiancée. The show had begun, but as she looked into his cold, unreadable eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not just an actress in his play. She was a pawn in a much more dangerous game, and she had no idea what the rules were. The Met Gala was a dizzying, overwhelming vortex of flashing lights, champagne, and the suffocating scent of 1,000 competing perfumes. Leora felt like she was drowning. She smiled until her cheeks ached, shook hands with people whose names she instantly forgot, and murmured polite, meaningless pleasantries. Through it all, Damien was a constant, solid presence by her side. His hand never left the small of her back, a possessive, grounding weight that was both a comfort and a constant reminder of her gilded cage. He guided her through the glittering crowds with an effortless grace, introducing her as "my fiancée, Leora." The reactions were a mixture of shock, envy, and thinly veiled speculation. Damien Blackwood, the untouchable, ice-hearted recluse, was engaged, and to a complete unknown. The gossip was palpable, a buzzing, electric current in the air. "Damien, darling, I almost didn't believe the rumors." A woman with fire-red hair and a diamond necklace that could probably fund a small war descended upon them. "You've been holding out on us." "Victoria," Damien said, his voice smooth as velvet, "allow me to introduce Leora Vane. Leora, this is Victoria Sterling, an old friend." Victoria's sharp eyes scanned Leora from head to toe, the friendly smile not quite reaching them. "Charmed, I'm sure," she said, her voice laced with a subtle, sweet venom. "You'll have to tell me how you managed to tame this beast." The last woman who tried, she let the sentence hang in the air, a deliberate, cruel provocation. The air grew thick with unspoken words. The ghost of Isabella de la Cruz, Damien's dead fiancée, was a constant, invisible presence in their world. Leora had seen her portraits online, a stunningly beautiful woman with a radiant smile and laughing eyes. She was everything Leora wasn't: confident, polished, born into this world of obscene wealth and privilege. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hand on Leora's back became a vice-like grip. "Isabella has been gone a long time, Victoria," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. "It was time for me to move on." He steered Leora away, leaving Victoria with a triumphant smirk. The encounter left Leora feeling shaken. She was not just a replacement, she was a placeholder, a pale imitation of a ghost. Later that evening, as they were standing on a balcony overlooking the floodlit gardens, a man approached them. He was handsome in a rugged, windswept way, with kind eyes and a warm smile that was the complete antithesis of Damien's cold perfection. "Damien," the man said, his voice filled with a genuine warmth that was startling in this environment of pretense. "It's good to see you." Damien's entire demeanor shifted. The icy mask cracked, and for a moment he looked almost human. "Julian," he said, a hint of something that sounded like relief in his voice. "I didn't know you were in town." "Wouldn't miss it," Julian said, his eyes turning to Leora. "And you must be Leora. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "This is Julian Croft," Damien explained, the introduction feeling different, more personal than the others. We grew up together." Julian shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. "Don't let this one scare you," he said, winking at her. "His bark is much worse than his bite." The easy camaraderie between the two men was a stark contrast to Damien's usual cold detachment. For the first time, Leora saw a glimpse of the man behind the myth, a man who was capable of friendship, of warmth. They talked for a few minutes, Julian asking her about her fact, art history studies. From Factad was, her fact is a restivation, and to take it minds of shoulder whence Julian's lure. A standing is the word that were fact and need to push at them, that cheaps asking on the sake and saving. Julian asking her about her fact in union with genuine entry. They comes out and back from the eights. Lore fact and have to discover rights. Lore fact is interests with my friendship. Lore fact is looking asking her, which is interest, where a violence for Laura facting. Julian asking to all loud of use of scene. For a facture of her stage, they coughed your last. A nature of the health. Form of fact. Julian asking her. Online where Julian. Laura fact is with you. Laura fact is our constant churching. Will still, and store for every. Leora saw running up insisting, and Julian student. Laura fact is enters fang. Julian asking her about here. Julian asking her friendship. Julian asking her friendship. Frank. Finds everything. That Laura fact is a numbering. Lure fact is face in the revision. Laura fact is in understand. And there a fairy, meaning lag course. Finds any big lang course. Laura fact is in her first. In asking. Finds including lang course of lang course. Laura fact is in her's face. And there fairy, meaning lang course. Finds including lang course. Finds and understand. Finds and morm. Finds including lang course of lang course. Finds and understand. Finds and understand. Finds in places 2 years. Finds and understands of fact. Finds in forces and end parts of freed and she word. Finds in 5 of. Finds and understands of fact. Finds in 5. Finds in forces that have comes as an effect. Finds in forces in an art information. Finds in forces. Finds in forces of fine. Finds in forces. Finds in forces of study. Finds in forces. Finds in forces of study. Finds in forces of 6. Finds in forces. Finds in forces parts. Finds in forces. Finds in forces list. Finds in forces and study of several. Finds in forces. Finds in forces 84754s. Finds in forces. Finds and forces in study of several 7. Finds and forces aspect. Finds and forces aspect to disease in kingdom study. Finds and forces aspect to disease in kingdom study. Finds and forces aspect to disease in kingdom study. Finds and forces aspect to disease in kingdom study. Finds and forces aspect to disease in kingdom study. Finds and forces aspect to disease in kingdom study. She's been feeding information to my competitors, trying to sabotage my company from the inside out. And suddenly Leora understood. This isn't about your board, she whispered, the horrifying truth dawning on her. This is about her. You're using me to what? To hurt her? To prove you've moved on? A slow, cruel smile twisted Damien's lips. It was the smile of a man pushed to the brink, a man willing to burn down the world to get his revenge. Serafina has been trying to convince my grandmother, who controls a significant portion of the voting shares in my company, that I am unstable, that my grief has made me unfit to lead, he said, his voice dripping with venom. An engagement, a happy, stable relationship, neutralizes her influence. It's a strategic move, a checkmate. Leora stared at him, horrified. She wasn't just a pawn, she was a weapon in a war she didn't even know she was fighting, a war against a grieving sister. You're a monster, she whispered, the words filled with a quiet, trembling fury. Damien's dark eyes met hers. The pain was gone, replaced by the familiar, chilling emptiness. I told you I would do whatever it takes to protect my legacy, he said, his voice cold as the grave. And you, Leora, agreed to help me. You signed the contract. He was right, she had, but she hadn't known what she was signing up for. She hadn't known that she would be a tool used to inflict more pain on a family that had already suffered an unimaginable loss. When they arrived back at the hotel, he walked her to the door of her suite. The silence between them was a chasm, filled with the ghosts of the past and the ugly truths of the present. As she reached for the doorknob, he spoke her name, Leora. She paused, her back to him. Be careful, he said, his voice low and urgent. Serafina is not just a rival. She's dangerous. She will try to get to you. She will try to destroy you to get to me. Leora turned to face him, her heart pounding. The game had changed. The stakes were higher, more personal, more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. She was no longer just playing the part of a fiancé. She was a target. And the man she was pretending to love was not her protector. He was the one who had put her directly in the line of fire. The truth about Serafina de la Cruz acted like a poison, corrupting Leora's gilded reality. The opulent suite was no longer a haven, but a beautifully decorated cell. The designer gowns felt like costumes for a role she despised, and the diamond on her finger was a constant, heavy reminder of the lie she was living. She was a soldier in a war she hadn't signed up for, a war fueled by a ghost's memory and a billionaire's guilt. Damien's warning echoed in her every waking moment, a perpetual hum of anxiety becoming the soundtrack to her days. Every shadow seemed to lengthen menacingly. Every unfamiliar face felt like a spy. The game had turned lethal, and she was the primary target, a pawn placed squarely in the line of fire. The enemy's first move was swift and cruel. A few days after the gala, a frantic call came from her mother. Leora, what's happening? She pleaded, her voice thin with panic. A woman was here. She said she was from the hospital's patient advocacy office. She asked so many questions about you, about the money for the surgery. She kept saying the payment was flagged as suspicious activity. A chill snaked down Leora's spine. What did she look like, Mom? Oh, very elegant. Tall, with dark hair, beautifully dressed, her mother recounted. But her eyes, Leora, her eyes were so cold. Serafina. She had bypassed Leora entirely, striking at her single greatest vulnerability. It was a masterfully cruel tactic, designed not just to gather information, but to inflict maximum psychological terror. Mom, listen carefully, Leora said, her voice trembling with a fury that momentarily eclipsed her fear. Do not speak to her again. Don't speak to anyone about this. I will handle it, I promise. She ended the call, her hands shaking. This was the true face of the conflict, not boardroom takeovers, but the quiet terrorizing of a sick woman. She felt a desperate urge to confront Damien for what his war was doing to her family. But he was in Tokyo. She was completely alone. Sleep offered no escape that night. The cavernous silence of the suite felt suffocating. Pacing for hours like a caged tiger, the glittering panorama of the city outside felt like a mockery. She was overcome by a desperate need to reconnect with her former life, with something authentic and real. Acting on pure impulse, she changed into a simple dress and slipped out of the hotel. A taxi took her to the Rusty Mug, a scruffy, unassuming bar in her old neighborhood. It was the antithesis of Damien's world. The air thick with spilled beer, the noise a chaotic symphony of laughter and awful karaoke. It was imperfect, and it was freedom. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. Leora, is that really you? She turned to see Mark, a kind-eyed classmate. Mark! Hi, she managed, a genuine smile spreading across her face. I haven't seen you in ages, he said, his brow furrowed with honest concern. I was so sorry to hear about your mom. How is she? His simple kindness was nearly her undoing. She's much better, she said, swallowing hard. The surgery was a success. That's incredible, he beamed. Then his eyes took in her appearance. Wow, you look different. Very expensive. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. It's a very long story. They talked for hours about classes and professors, a balm on her fractured soul. She revealed nothing of her life with Damien, the contract, or the ugly war she was trapped in. For a few precious hours, she was just Leora, a normal student. It was late when she finally stepped outside. As she waited on the curb, a familiar, sleek black car glided to a stop beside her. The tinted windows slid down, and her heart plunged into her stomach. It was Damien. He was supposed to be halfway around the world. His face was a thunderous mask of cold, controlled fury. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger. It was a deep, searing betrayal that terrified her more than any physical threat. Get in the car, he commanded, his voice dangerously low. She obeyed, sliding into the cold leather seat. The drive back was a masterclass in menacing silence. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. When they arrived at her suite, he followed her in, the door slamming shut behind them like a judge's gavel. What in God's name were you thinking? He finally roared, pacing her room. Going back to a place like that? Being seen with him? He's a friend, Leora retorted, her own anger flaring. It's a bar, Damien, not a crack den. I needed to get out. I needed to feel human. You don't get to feel human, he sneered, his face contorted by a possessive rage. For the next year, you belong to me. Your life is not your own. You will not jeopardize this arrangement by being seen with other men. You don't own me, she screamed, the words ripping from her throat. This is a business deal. Have you forgotten that in your insane, vengeful quest against a woman who has every right to despise you? He stopped pacing, his chest heaving as he stared at her. The raw, animal pain was back in his eyes, at war with his fury. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? She challenged, stepping toward him, unintimidated. I know you're so consumed by guilt that you're willing to burn down the world. You're using me as a shield, and you're using your grief as a license to be a monster. He flinched as if she'd slapped him. He stalked toward her, his hands clenched into tight fists. For one heart-stopping second, she was certain he was going to strike her. Instead, he did something infinitely more shocking. He lunged forward, grabbed her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was a kiss born of pure desperation and rage. It was bruising and raw, a frantic, all-consuming act of possession that shattered every rule of their contract. It was a release of all the unspoken tension, the forbidden magnetic pull that had been simmering between them from the very beginning. She should have fought him, but to her own profound horror, she found herself responding, her hands tangling in his hair as her own anger dissolved into a terrifying cocktail of despair and desire. He pulled back abruptly, and they stared at each other, both breathless and wide-eyed with shock. The fury had vanished from his gaze, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability that mirrored her own. "Leora," he breathed, his voice ragged. The sound of her name shattered the spell. The horrifying reality of the moment crashed down upon her. This wasn't love or passion. This was the collision of two broken, desperate people. "No," she whispered, backing away, her body trembling. "This isn't part of the deal." Like a switch being flipped, the mask of the cold, heartless CEO slammed back into place. "You're right," he said, his voice utterly flat. "It won't happen again." He turned on his heel and walked to the door, his posture rigid. "My flight was rescheduled. I leave for Tokyo in an hour. We'll discuss your transgression when I get back." Then he was gone, the door clicking shut with an air of finality. Leora collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking. The phantom taste of his kiss was still on her lips. The contract, her shield, was broken. The lines hadn't just been blurred, they'd been vaporized. And in the silent, opulent suite, she was struck by a terrifying realization. The greatest danger to her wasn't Serafina. It was the man she was pretending to love, the man whose kiss had just lit a fire she feared would consume them both. The 2 days Damien was in Tokyo felt like an eternity. The kiss had shattered the rules of their arrangement, leaving a tense, charged silence in its wake. When he returned, he was armed with an unnerving, icy calm. He didn't mention the kiss or her unsanctioned trip to the bar. He retreated behind an impenetrable wall of professional detachment, treating her with a distant courtesy that was more chilling than any anger. He had relegated her back to her role, a business asset. But Leora couldn't go back. She couldn't be a weapon in his war against a grieving sister, a pawn in a game fueled by revenge. The money had saved her mother, but it was costing Leora her soul. She decided to end it. She found him late one night in his study, a dark, masculine space she'd never entered. He stood by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, a solitary figure against the glittering city. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady. He didn't turn. "I have nothing to say." "Well, I do," she pressed, stepping into the room. "I can't do this anymore, Damien. I won't be your weapon." A short, harsh laugh escaped him. "It's a little late for a crisis of conscience, don't you think? You signed the contract." "I'll give you the money back," she declared, the words feeling like liberation. "All of it. I'll work for the rest of my life to pay you back. Just let me go." He turned then, his eyes dark and unreadable. "And your mother? Her recovery? Can you afford that on a student's salary?" It was a cruel reminder of his power, but she held her ground. "We'll manage. We always have. We'll be poor, but we'll be free." He stared at her, a strange mix of frustration and something that almost looked like admiration in his eyes. "What do you want from me, Leora?" he asked, his voice raw. "I want you to stop," she pleaded, her voice softening. "Stop hiding behind your guilt. Stop using it to punish yourself and everyone around you. The accident. It was an accident. It wasn't your fault." "You don't know that," he roared, slamming his glass on the table. "I was driving. I was angry. If I had just been a better man, she would still be alive." "And what about Serafina?" Leora challenged, her heart aching for him. "Do you think Isabella would have wanted this? For you to torture her sister and use her memory as a weapon?" His face crumpled. The cold, heartless CEO, the master of the universe, finally broke. He sank into a leather armchair, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. All of Leora's anger vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of compassion. She knelt before him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. "It's not too late to fix this," she whispered. He looked up, his eyes filled with a despair so deep it was like an abyss. "How?" "Tell her the truth," Leora said simply. "Tell Serafina everything. The real version. Stop fighting her. Just talk to her." The next day he did. He called Serafina and asked her to meet, without lawyers or pretense. Leora waited, her nerves frayed. He returned hours later, looking drained but lighter. The crushing weight he had carried for 5 years had begun to lift. She listened, he said, his voice filled with quiet awe. We talked for hours. She cried, I cried. She hasn't forgiven me. Not yet, but she's willing to try. He looked at Leora, and a genuine, unguarded smile touched his lips, chasing away the shadows. She wants to meet you. A few days later, they met with Serafina. The coldness in her eyes had been replaced by a deep sadness. He told me everything, Serafina said to Leora. Thank you. You showed him a kindness he didn't deserve. You saved him from himself. The war was over. That evening, Leora packed her old, frayed backpack. The contract was void. She was free. Damien found her in the suite. You don't have to go, he said quietly. Yes, I do, she replied, turning to face him. I need to find myself again, the real me. He nodded in understanding. I want you to have this. He held out a folder. The money is yours. Consider it damages for what I put you through. She shook her head, but he insisted. Please, let me do this one thing right. Reluctantly, she took it. He walked her to the door, the silence between them now comfortable, filled with unspoken possibilities. Leora, he said, his voice sincere. This isn't goodbye. She looked up into his dark, intense eyes, no longer shielded by ice. What is it then? It's a promise, he said. A promise that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a man who is worthy of you. A man you could choose. For real. A genuine smile, bright with hope, spread across Leora's face. I'd like that, she whispered. She walked out of the hotel and into the cool city air. She had faced the cold-hearted CEO and found the broken man inside. And in saving him, she had finally saved herself. Leora walked away with her freedom, but what does the future hold for her and the changed Damien Blackwood? Can a love born from a twisted contract and forged in the fires of grief and revenge ever truly be real? Their story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are not money or power, but forgiveness, truth, and the courage to choose your own path. If this story of drama, sacrifice, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story they can't put down. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama. What did you think of Damien's transformation? Let us know in the comments below.